Hello everybody, and welcome back to another Overwatch League fan thoughts and analysis. Today I will be taking a look at the Pacific Division as a kind of a whole, the competitiveness of the division, if it looks like a better division than it did last season, all that kind of stuff. That's the kind of stuff I'm going to touch on. Going to go very general, very little details per team. If you want more information or more opinions on the different teams, feel free to check out the playlist that this video can be found in on my channel, the Fan Thoughts and Analysis playlist, if you want to check all that out. But let's jump into the Pacific Division. The Season 2 Pacific Division, obviously, following Season 1, you hope ultimately for an improvement. The Pacific Division last season was the weaker of the two divisions by far, especially in the first two stages. No team from the Pacific Division made the stage playoffs in the first half of the season. It was London and New York and Philadelphia and Houston that made stage playoffs in the first half of the season. And ultimately, even at the end of the season, half of the league, right, was predominantly Atlantic. Five of the top 7 teams this past season were from teams from the Atlantic Division. Now, obviously, Seoul and Houston had the same record. Houston just had slightly better map differential, and but 5 of the top 7 teams were Atlantic. 2 playoff teams were Pacific, and I would argue that the 2 best teams at the end of the regular season were from the Pacific, and they were the Valiant and the Gladiators, and they both, of course, made the playoffs. But overall, the Pacific Division is pretty weak. Obviously, that was home to the Shanghai Dragons, who had a horrible, horrible season. It was home to the Dallas Fuel, who for the first 3 stages were terrible. It's home to the San Francisco Shock, who people said would be pretty good, and they never really got to where I think people thought they could get during the season. You had the Seoul Dynasty, who were just a big disappointment of a team. They didn't really get to that level that people thought they would. And you had the Valiant and the Gladiators, who impressed people and who ended up being playoff teams and playoff competitors, and teams who I think a lot of people saw as being potential champions, and neither of them made it to that point. So I think you look at the Pacific Division from last season, it was very, very weak in its overall performance. This season, I do not expect the same thing at all. I think the Pacific Division looks to be the better and stronger division this time around, particularly in the fact that I think the gap between the highest team and the lowest team in this division is not as big as it is in the Atlantic. I don't think any of the top 3 teams in the league are in the Pacific Division this year, and I think that that's a very common trend with this Pacific Division from last season to this season. But I think it's a lot closer and a lot more consistent, and I think this season we'll see a much closer and more competitive Pacific Division. So obviously last season, the LA Valiant, being the number 2 team in the entire league, were the best team in the Pacific Division, and they look to repeat that success as much as they can. I think they will be close to the top. I don't believe they will be the number 1 team coming out of the Pacific this season, but I still think they'll be up towards the top. I think they'll be a top 3, top 4 team in the Pacific, which, when you have 8 teams, that's, top half is still pretty good. But top 3, top 4 in your division doesn't necessarily make you a season playoff team. And it's really hard, honestly. Like, when I'm going to be doing a power ranking in 2 weeks or so, but when you look at these power rankings and you try to really determine where these teams are, it's a really close pack in a lot of these areas. And the Pacific Division in particular is really hard to pinpoint because I feel like the competition is going to be so fierce that teams who are playoff caliber will probably miss out because they're losing games to teams that are very similar in skill level, and the division is just that much better. So that's where I kind of am with this division. It's very hard to give solid predictions on it, but in the way that the Atlantic had teams that I would say were like very clearly like top teams, middle teams, bottom teams, there is, in my opinion, a distinction between the best teams in this division and the worst teams in this division, but it's the middle that I think is very, very, very fluid, and there's no real team that I could say is, you know, better than another team in a lot of cases for this division. So I think the Valiant will finish towards the top, but I don't know if they will be the top. When it comes to contenders for the top in the division, I look at the next two teams I'm going to talk about here. The first is the LA Gladiators, one of the strongest teams after the regular season, going into the season playoffs, particularly for season one. The LA Gladiators looked to be a team that was going to really contend in that season playoffs, and they ultimately fell to the London Spitfire. Doing so even pretty well. I mean, their first game in the playoffs was brilliant. It was one of the best games I've ever seen. So, the LA Gladiators, though, of course, have lost one of the biggest players from Overwatch League Season 1, and that is Fissure, who is now with the Seoul Dynasty. Now, I see people say Fissure was toxic and all this other stuff, and you wonder how will the loss of Fissure affect this team. I think this team will be maybe slightly worse, but I think their DPS is now better, so in that way they might be slightly better. We haven't seen exactly what the meta is going to look like. Some people still think it might be goats heavy, but I think the changes that they've just implemented that have just gone live will probably have an impact on that. So I don't know what to expect, but I think the Gladiators are looking to be one of the contenders in this division. They're looking to be potentially the team to beat in the Pacific Division, but a team that I personally think people are sleeping on and that people are saying aren't going to impress, or people I think aren't talking about enough, is the Seoul Dynasty. They gained one of the best players in the Overwatch League in Fissure. In Fissure. I don't know why I thought it wasn't Fissure. In Fissure. You're taking a player who changed a team entirely, putting it on a team who most people really liked last season. The team is completely new in a lot of ways, right? There are 10 players on this team. 5 of them are returning. Half of this team is brand new. So they are replacing some of that weakness that they had on their roster in Season 1 with younger players, newer players, who don't have that Overwatch League experience, but obviously you have to branch out. I really like this Seoul Dynasty roster. I think when you have, in my opinion, 2 of the best players in the Overwatch League in Fleta and Fissure on one team, that's a big, big, big addition to your team. And I think that this team is going to be incredibly competitive this season, much more than they were in Season 1. I think people are sleeping on them a little bit too much, but I don't know if they will be exactly what's needed to be the winners of this Pacific Division, but I think that they will definitely be top contenders for this division, and I think people are sleeping on them just slightly too much. On the flip side, a team that I think a lot of people are expecting to compete pretty well, and I think have a good chance, is a new team, an expansion team, and that is the Vancouver Titans. The Vancouver Titans were formed from the runaway team from Overwatch Contenders, and they were one of the most successful teams in Season 2 of Contenders. They were pretty good in Season 1 of Contenders, but Season 2 was really their big breakout. Of course, they just won Season 3 of Contenders, but it's a different roster that did that. But the Vancouver Titans are looking to be the team that can come in and carry the success that they had in Contender Season 2 into the Overwatch League. The question is, can they actually do that? Because it may ultimately end up where they can't, right? They may fail, they may crash and burn, and they may not be able to carry on that success. But you do have a player in Hureg who has Overwatch League experience. Now, Hureg, obviously not a player who stayed on an Overwatch League roster, in this case the London Spitfire roster, for a reason, most likely. But he has that experience. He's not really one of their star players anyway, but This is a team that I think most people really expect to succeed. And while I think that they are a team to be interested in and a team to look at as potentially contenders for that championship, I want to see them play before I put them in that top bracket as a top four, top three team. But I think they have a very good chance, right? They succeeded in contenders. Obviously, the biggest kind of asterisk there is yes, they competed in contenders, but all the best players from Korea were in the Overwatch leagues. They weren't playing the best players in Korea. How would they match up against these best players from Korea? And that's a very, very, very valid point and valid statement to make. If you're winning contenders when contenders isn't the premier league, does it really prove anything? So I look at that, and I think that you can definitely make a very, very, very big argument against the Vancouver Titans and their successes, and I think you would ultimately be correct in saying that. So I want to say that I think as much talent as I think the Vancouver Titans have, I need to see them in action in the Overwatch League before I really start to give them any kind of praise and credit, because my opinion on this team has changed a lot since I first talked about them. So I'm excited to see what happens, but I don't want to give away too much because, of course, we have to wait for those power rankings that I'll be doing next week. So those are teams I want to mention as kind of the top four theoretically. This is where it gets very interesting, though, because I really don't think any of the teams I talk about from here on out are bad, with the exception of one, where I think the team is just problematic. But I want to start by talking about the team that was most likely, if you ask someone, the most disappointing team in the Overwatch League for Season 1, and that is the Shanghai Dragons. They didn't win a single game. They went 0-40. It's about as bad as you can go, and they have rebuilt this roster in a way that I really, really like. They went heavy on the Kongdu Panthera roster, a very successful roster, also in Contender Season 2. That, once again, you have to keep in mind, were they competing against the best players in Korea? No, so how good can they be? How good are they really? We'll have to see, but you have, at least in this case, which you don't have with the Vancouver Titans, is you have players with Overwatch League experience that actually played and that stuck around. Not someone like Hureg who didn't play a lot and got removed from a roster. In his case, the London Spitfire. In this case, of course, these are three players returning to the Shanghai Dragons roster in Dia, Geggery, and Fearless. I think this team is a team to look at to potentially compete for one of those later or lower playoff spots. I don't think they're going to be the top team in the league. I don't think they're going to be the top team in the Pacific, but I think they could be one of those wild card, win that tournament to get into the playoff type teams. And I'm excited to see what this team does now in its new kind of form, because I think this team is new and improved, and I'm excited to see where they go. And I'd still put them kind of middle of the pack in this division, but I think they have a ceiling that is pretty high, and I think they can do some great things with their new head coach, the new team, the new roster in general. I think it'll be a much, much more competitive Shanghai Dragons team, and I think we will be seeing the Shanghai Dragons potentially competing right away. Right? They could be winning their first game of the season, and I wouldn't be surprised. So that is where I would put them. Still say middle of the pack, of course, but I think they have a good chance at improving a lot. Next, I want to take a look at the San Francisco Shock. One of the teams from last season that was up and down and kind of in weird positions. I don't think they ever quite met that level that people expect them to meet at certain points during the season, especially late in the season. But they've done a lot to improve their roster. They added a bunch of new players. Smurf from the Houston Outlaws, Rascal, who was a free agent, Violet, who was a free agent, and Striker from the Boston Uprising. An incredible amount of DPS talent on this team. I'm excited to see how they use it, but I'm questioning how well they will match up with some of these other Pacific teams. It's a very young roster. How will this roster manage? I don't really know what to expect, but I think that they're once again in the same boat as Shanghai, middle of the pack, very well could make the playoffs, but I wouldn't be putting my money on them being a playoff team. Um, and I'm interested. I'm really interested in seeing what they do. Truthfully, that's mostly what I'm interested in seeing as a whole is how they bounce back and how they use this young roster and this new talent to build a team for success. Because I think that that's where they struggled last season was they never quite reached that success. They'd get some big wins. They'd beat some teams like Boston Uprising in Stage 4, where you're like, this is the real deal for San Francisco. But then they never get to the point where you would expect them to get, and then you're like, wait, that's not. But I thought that they were improved and better, so I'm hoping that the San Francisco Shock look better this season. But I think this division is a lot tougher, so I don't really know if they will be noticeably better. The same thing goes to the Dallas Fuel. I think they look better, but it's a question of with how tough this division is, can they get out of that hole that they found themselves in late in the season? And I think they were a very improved team at the end of season 1, and that is something definitely to think about and to recognize that they will very likely improve immensely going forward. So it wouldn't surprise me if this Dallas Fuel team makes the playoffs, but I need to see them start off the season strong before I really say they're a team that can do it. But I think the additions of Zachary and RCK and Closer help out a lot in getting this team to a point where they can be competing with these other teams in this division. Next, we have the final 3 expansion teams. We have the Hangzhou Spark and the Guangzhou Charge, who I kind of have in this middle low group. I put the Hangzhou Spark slightly higher as I think they have better players. They have Gushui. I don't think language will be as big of an issue. While I don't really know the differences between Korean and Chinese, I don't really know what the typical language is, what the Shanghai Dragons used last season to balance Korean players with Chinese players. I don't know if they use English. I don't know if they use Chinese, if they use Korean, if there's some other language that I don't know about that Eastern Asian countries share. I don't really know, but I'm excited to see what the Hangzhou Spark do. I think they have a very good roster. I think they have some solid players, and I think they are one of the teams that could surprise people. But I really don't expect them to be a playoff team. I don't expect many of the expansion teams in this league to be playoff teams, to be honest with you, because it's a big task, especially when you're going up against some teams that have tons of experience at this point in time. But I think the Hangzhou Spark are slightly better off than the Guangzhou Charge because the Guangzhou Charge have the weird language issues with a player from the UK and a player from the US plus 2 players from China and then a predominantly Korean roster. I genuinely have no idea what to expect with this team at times. I don't really know what to expect from them when you realize that they basically have to play players that don't speak the same language as the others because they don't have enough DPS players to not do that. So these 2 teams I kind of have in that low bottom part of this division, but I still think they'll be fine at the end of the day. The one team that I'm really, really not a fan of in this division is the Chengdu Hunters. While they did add Ji Kiren as another tank player since I've talked about this team, I still really don't think this team's incredible. I mean, he comes from Team CC, who were semi-finalists for Contenders Season 3. But I think it was Bacon Jack or Yang Xiaolong was having issues with getting a visa. And it's just, the whole thing is, this team is just problematic. I feel like so many things are going on with this team that are just not going well, and I just think so much is going on with this team that's weird. So I just can't, in good faith, put my faith behind this Chain 200's roster. I hate saying that, and I feel like it's awful really saying that, but I think there's just a lot of issues they're going to have to overcome before I can really put them as contenders in a division that I think is very, very close and very competitive. And I think the Chengdu Hunters have the weakest roster in this competitive division. So that's really where I am with that. But of course, I'll give my power rankings in a couple weeks. Next week, I don't think I'll do any Overwatch League fan thoughts and analysis videos just to get the power rankings prepared and get ready for that the week before the season starts. But I might try to get some other stuff out in case you're curious and want some stuff. So I'll try to get that stuff done. But that is my thoughts, or those are my thoughts, I guess, on the Pacific Division for Overwatch League Season 2. If you enjoyed the video, want more of my analysis for whatever reason, you can subscribe and also like if you enjoyed. But that's everything I have for you, so thank you for watching. I'll see you all in the next video, and goodbye.